Yesterday's court appearance of captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a geopolitical moment laid bare, raw, unsettling, and revealing. In a New York courtroom, the former strongman stood in restraint, listening through an interpreter as the judge addressed him. Are you Nicolas Maduro? The judge asked, and Maduro quickly responded, I am the president of Venezuela. When asked to plead, Maduro did not equivocate. He said he was not guilty. He said he was a decent man. He said he had been kidnapped. His wife, Celia Flores, seated nearby, mirrored the defiance with a rigid composure that suggested not remorse, but grievance. Grievance at having been stripped of power and paraded before the very order he spent years defying, that is, the American authority. Maduro's demeanor in the courtroom was telling. He was not subdued. He was affronted. This was not the posture of a man acknowledging a reckoning, but of one insisting on an injustice. The court, to him, was not a forum of law, but a theater of humiliation. And yet, for millions of Venezuelans scattered across borders and continents, those who fled hunger, those who fled his repression and fear, this moment yesterday in court felt like history exhaling. Whether justice or spectacle, it was a turning point. The world predictably split in two. One camp condemned the manner of the arrest. They invoked sovereignty, international law, and a dangerous precedent. The other camp applauded, framing the moment as liberation, a dictator finally facing consequences. The Venezuelan opposition leader, speaking on Fox News last night, said she would hurriedly return home from hiding. She was chased out by Maduro's regime for daring to challenge it. To her and many like her, this was not an abduction. It was an opening. France, the United Kingdom, and the entire European Union addressing a hastily summoned United Nations Security Council yesterday in New York, were quick to denounce the method, while carefully avoiding any forceful condemnation of Washington. They frowned, but they did not act. And therein, ladies and gentlemen, lies the hypocrisy that defines our age. Condemnation without consequence is not principle, it is performance. Paris, in particular, spoke with a straight face about legality, even as history records France's hand in the overthrow and installation of regimes across Africa. You can name Chad, you can name Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, Gabon, Cameroon, and beyond. When it suits the French interests, sovereignty becomes flexible. When it doesn't, it becomes sacred. The African Union, ladies and gentlemen, followed suit with a statement criticizing the United States. One almost laughed if the irony were not so tragic. Africa is home to the world's densest concentration of sit-tight rulers, dictators. Talk about Uganda, Tanzania, Cameroon, Chad, Gabon, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Ivory Coast, and you can name the rest. Leaders who have ruled for decades, crushed dissent, manipulated constitutions, and presided over poverty with impunity. The AU's anxiety is certainly not about Venezuela. It is about precedent. It is about fear. Fear that one day, the same measures might be applied closer to home or closer to them. That fear, not fidelity to law, explains their outrage. Then there is America's own house, divided as ever. On the left, condemnation arrives swiftly, not because of a consistent philosophy of international law, but because Donald Trump did it. When Trump acts, Democrats reflexively don the robes of Pharisees and Sadducees, scolding from the moral high ground they really occupy when power is theirs. National security becomes secondary to partisan theater in Washington. Principles become props. This is where memory matters, ladies and gentlemen. We should note this, that the hunt for Maduro did not begin yesterday under Trump. It did not begin with Trump. It began under Barack Obama and continued under Joe Biden. Indictments were filed against Maduro. Bounties were offered for him. The rhetoric hardened. The message was unmistakable. Maduro was a target. And here is a question that demolishes today's manufactured outrage. What were those bounties issued by Obama and Biden for? To invite Maduro to a Venezuelan court? To place him under house arrest in Caracas? Or to do exactly what was done yesterday by Donald Trump? Seize him and put him before an American judge? You cannot light a fuse for years and then feign shock when the explosion finally comes. If Donald Trump finished what others started, what Barack and Biden started, then the correct response, if one had principles, would be to acknowledge continuity, not cry wolf. But principles are scarce in Washington, D.C. Politics, plentiful. Now let me be clear here, because clarity matters. I am not here to defend a sovereign nation invading another, arresting its leader, and exporting him to stand trial abroad. I condemn it in the strongest of terms. Such actions corrode international norms and invite a world where might routinely trumps law. Today it is Venezuela. Tomorrow it could be anyone. This is dangerous terrain. But condemnation must coexist with honesty. Geopolitics is not a seminar. It is a contest of interest. The United States did not hunt Maduro primarily because he sponsored drug cartels, not because he persecuted opponents or filled prisons with his own citizens. Those crimes were tolerated for years. What changed was the map. Russia, China, and Iran entrenched themselves in Venezuela, the backyard of America. They did so militarily, economically, and strategically. And suddenly Caracas was no longer just a humanitarian disaster, it was a geopolitical problem. What do you do when your enemy suddenly takes cover in your own backyard? Fold your hands and hope that he leaves? That is a risk, a real danger. What happened yesterday was a reenactment of an old doctrine, dusted off and enforced with modern force. the Monroe Doctrine. The idea that external powers have no business establishing strategic footholds in the Western Hemisphere. You can debate its morality, and you should, but you cannot deny its persistence. When Washington perceived Moscow and Beijing encroaching, it acted. They acted. Not out of virtue, of course, out of interest. And this is the truth many prefer to avoid. International law is often the language used after power has already spoken. It is invoked by the weak to restrain the strong, and by the strong to justify themselves after the fact. It rarely prevents action. It explains it. Still, responsibility matters too, and here is where Maduro's own choices return to indict him. He did not have to rule with cruelty. He did not have to jail opponents. He did not have to crush protests or preside over an economic collapse that sent millions fleeing across borders from his country. He could have governed with restraint, respected human rights, and reduced the pretext for external intervention. He did not. Instead, he ruled as if consequence were a myth. Dictators always believe they are exceptions, isn't it? They mistake longevity for immunity. But history is unkind to such illusions. When a country bleeds its people, empties its streets, and exports despair, it invites attention. When that attention meets geopolitical rivalry, the end game accelerates. That is how dictators fall. Not always neatly, not always justly, but inevitably. Some fall to their people, some to coups, some to cuts, and some like Maduro to the collision of their own abuses with the interests of greater powers. Yesterday's courtroom scene in New York was not justice perfected, it was reality exposed. A world where hypocrisy is bipartisan, sovereignty is selective, and power, naked, unapologetic power, still writes the final draft. If we are to learn anything from this moment, it is this. The language of outrage must be matched by the courage of consistency. Otherwise, we all are just actors in a drama we pretend to oppose until it reaches our door.